A few months ago, something happened in my life that completely changed the way I see the spiritual world. I was never the type to think much about it. I always had faith that there is something beyond, but I never delved into it. But after that night, there is no way to ignore it. Nowadays, when I lie down to sleep, I feel that strange sensation, as if my soul had stayed between two places. My name is Camila Vasquez. I'm 33 years old, and I'm a nurse in a busy emergency room in New York. I've been married to Marcos for almost a decade, and we have a 5-year-old daughter, Helena. That Friday night, I was on duty when a massive accident on the highway flooded the emergency room with critically injured victims. The hospital turned into chaos. I was trying to stabilize a patient when I heard a loud noise from the entrance. One of the paramedics was bringing in a man in cardiac arrest, and in the rush, the stretcher crashed hard against the side of a metal cabinet. The structure gave way, and before I could react, one of the upper shelves collapsed. Something heavy, perhaps an oxygen tank or a portable defibrillator, struck my head forcefully. The last thing I remember was the warm sensation of blood dripping down my neck and the shouts of my colleagues calling my name before everything went dark. When I woke up, it was not the way I imagined. I wasn't in the operating room, nor in the hospital, not even in my own body. The pain was completely gone, and the first thing I felt was a deep silence, a kind of emptiness so absolute that it made me realize something was very wrong. I looked around and realized I was no longer in that chaotic emergency room. Instead, I found myself in a vast space, without walls, no real floor, just an environment illuminated by a soft light which didn't seem to come from a single point, but from all directions at once. I didn't feel any weight on my body, but I also didn't feel completely free in the air. It was like I was floating yet still grounded where I stood. It was then that I sensed a presence approaching. At first it was just a shadow in the distance, but as it got closer, I was overwhelmed by an indescribable feeling. It was warm yet overwhelming, peaceful yet immense. When I could finally see it better, I realized it was not just an ordinary person. The figure glowed in a way that seemed impossible to describe. The light around it was intense, but it didn't hurt my eyes. I knew, without needing any explanation, that this presence knew exactly who I was. When I heard its voice, without its lips moving, my whole body seemed to vibrate with a sound that was more felt than heard. Suddenly, I found myself in a place of grandeur impossible to explain. The sky above me wasn't like what we see on Earth. It pulsed with colors I had never seen before, as if they were alive. The air vibrated with an indescribable sound. It wasn't exactly music, but something that carried within it a feeling of purity and harmony. And then I saw the figures, immense beings, radiating light and splendor, far beyond anything my human mind could comprehend. It was as if every part of them was in tune with something greater. They didn't just exist there. They seemed to be part of the very fabric of that place. Then he pointed to one in particular. Among them all, there was one that shone uniquely, brighter and more magnificent than the others. Its appearance was overwhelming in beauty, covered with something resembling sparkling gemstones. Its wings expanded with an indescribable splendor, and its voice was so powerful, it seemed to vibrate through the air. "This is the one who once was the most exalted among the angels," said the figure beside me. His name was Lucifer. My chest tightened upon hearing this. How could something so perfect fall? As I tried to process everything, I turned to the figure beside me and murmured, almost unaware, "He is amazing." The words escaped without me thinking, as if my mind couldn't process what I was seeing. The light emanating from him was stunning, and his presence dominated everything around. Then, the voice beside me sounded again, calm, yet laden with an indescribable weight. Yes, he was the most beautiful creation, the most radiant of all. His shine was unmatched, his position elevated above the others. I paused before asking, even though I already knew the answer, what happened to him? The look of my guide remained fixed on the scene before us. "Watch carefully. Few souls have been able to see what you will see now." I remained silent, simply watching. At first, Lucifer seemed perfect, imposing and magnificent. But as time passed, I noticed a subtle detail. He began to frequently look at himself, admiring his own reflection in the gleaming surfaces of that place. His eyes shone, but not with devotion or gratitude, but with something deeper, something I couldn't name right away. "See," the voice beside me guided. This is the moment when something began to change within him. I continued watching, feeling an unease grow inside me. Slowly, his posture began to change. What was once humility turned into a silent desire for something greater. He began to compare himself to the others, my guide continued. And then came the question that would change everything. Why must I bow? Lucifer's gaze became different. The shine of his light no longer seemed to reflect just the greatness of that place, but his own grandeur. He no longer just saw his beauty, he analyzed it, studied it, and most importantly, began to desire something more. "That's where pride was born," my guide said, his voice filled with a silent sadness. He forgot that everything he had was a gift. He began to believe he deserved more, that he should be revered as the one who created him. Then I saw something disturbing. Lucifer not only admired his own light, but now sought the attention of the others. His gestures in leading the chants became more exaggerated, his voice more intense, as if he wanted to be noticed. I could feel the weight of his ambition growing. And the other angels, did they notice? I asked, feeling a lump in my throat. My guide nodded slowly. Some began to listen to his words, and doubt began to spread. The scene before me changed. I saw Lucifer walking among the other angels, his presence imposing, his gaze full of a dangerous certainty. But it wasn't a certainty based on truth, but on the illusion he created. Slowly, he began speaking with the others. His words seemed gentle, but they carried something corrosive. "Have you ever wondered why we must always bow?" Lucifer whispered to a group of angels who followed him. "Why don't we have the right to decide? We are strong, glorious. Why are we inferior?" My chest tightened hearing this. The angels around seemed hesitant, but I saw some beginning to consider his words. "Free will is a gift," my guide said beside me, "but it can also be a burden." And Lucifer was using this gift to plant seeds of discontent. I continued watching, my heart racing. What scared me most wasn't just what Lucifer said, but how he said it. His words weren't shouted, they weren't demands. They were soft, persuasive, full of a distorted logic. He didn't order the other angels to rebel. He made them question. Aren't we the strongest? The most beautiful? Weren't we created for something greater? I saw him whisper to a group who listened carefully. Do they tell us the whole truth? Or is there something they are hiding? Some of the angels moved away, disturbed, but others stayed. I could see doubt growing on their faces. This is how the fall begins, my guide spoke beside me. Not with a direct confrontation, but with small cracks in faith until everything collapses. I wanted to look away. I wanted to believe that those angels would see the lie before it was too late. But I saw, with a heavy heart, that many began to accept his words. Slowly, the shine of some of them seemed to lose some of its brilliance, as if that doubt began to eat away at something inside them. Then, I saw Lucifer move toward the center of that majestic place. He raised his voice, and, for the first time, there was no more subtlety in his words. I will rise above the others. I will take my place, for I am as worthy as he. His voice echoed with a strength that made everything around tremble. The angels who were with him rose up, while those who remained faithful looked on with sadness and disbelief. My guide sighed, his voice filled with sorrow. And that's how the war began. What happened next was something no words could fully describe. As soon as Lucifer proclaimed his rebellion, a piercing silence took over the atmosphere. as if even creation itself was absorbing the weight of what had just happened. Then, a wave of energy swept through everything around, and in an instant, the heavens were torn apart. The splendor of that place was taken over by something that should never have existed there. Conflict. I saw a massive group of angels rise up beside Lucifer, their gazes no longer reflecting pure light, but something distorted, corrupted. On the other side, faithful angels appeared, led by a being exuding power and justice. "Michael," my guide said, and at that moment, I understood this wasn't just a dispute of opinions. It was a battle for the very essence of what was good and true. The choice was made, and now there would be consequences. Then, what was once a kingdom of perfect harmony turned into a battlefield. But this fight wasn't like the wars on Earth, with swords and weapons. It was something much greater, something involving the very essence of existence. I saw beams of light cutting through the space, hitting one another with an impossible force. Each impact made the very environment tremble. The faithful angels, led by Michael, moved forward with determination, while Lucifer's followers resisted, driven by pride and the illusion of grandeur. I couldn't look away. I saw Lucifer at the center of everything, his beauty now distorted by fury. His shine, once glorious, seemed to flicker between light and darkness, as if his very essence was fragmenting. He thought he could win, my guide said beside me, but he didn't understand that power is not the same as truth. The battle continued, and slowly, the rebel side began to be pushed back. Lucifer screamed, his voice mixing arrogance and desperation, until, in an instant, everything changed. The final moment of the battle was something I will never forget. The space around seemed to vibrate with an indescribable force, and then came a flash. It was as if the very fabric of that place was reacting to what was happening. Michael and the faithful angels advanced with irresistible force, while Lucifer's followers tried to resist, but were being crushed by the weight of the truth they had rejected. Lucifer screamed, his voice no longer the perfect melody of before, but a distorted roar full of rage and desperation. It was then that everything broke apart. In a single instant, he and his followers were thrown away with an impossible speed. They fell, like stars ripped from the sky, being cast out of that kingdom of light. The sight was terrifying. Their shining forms were transforming into something dark, as if the fall was corroding everything they once were. "And so," my guide said, his voice filled with sorrow, "those who chose to walk away from the light created their own darkness." I watched, completely motionless, as Lucifer and his followers were pulled away, their lights disappearing into the void. The impact of that vision was so strong, I felt as if a real weight had fallen on me. Those who were once glorious were now becoming something unrecognizable, as if their essence was being torn apart by the very choice they made. "That was the price of pride," my guide said beside me, his voice serene but full of meaning. "Turning away from the truth doesn't just destroy what you have, but what you are." My gaze remained fixed on that dark abyss now surrounding them. They can never come back?" I asked, my voice weaker than I expected. There was a pause before the answer. They made an absolute decision with full awareness. Unlike humanity, who learns and grows with their choices, the angels understand the truth from the start. The way back was destroyed by their very pride. I wanted to believe there was a way, that maybe at some point there would be redemption for them. But as I looked at the emptiness where they had fallen, I understood something terrible. They didn't want to return. Lucifer didn't regret it. He didn't see his fall as a defeat, but as an act of revolt, a challenge against what he refused to accept. The darkness around him wasn't an imposed prison. It was the reflection of what he had become. "That's the real consequence of choice," my guide continued. "The greatest punishment is not something imposed, but the result of what each person decides to be. Pride not only pushed him away, but transformed him." My chest tightened. I had always thought evil was something that simply existed, but there, I understood that it is born from within, grows through small choices until it consumes everything around it. So, is that it? Is he lost forever? I asked. My guide didn't answer immediately, but his gaze spoke more than any word. He chose his own destiny, he said finally. And now, his only mission is to drag as many as he can with him. Those words lingered in the air, heavy, like a dark cloud ready to burst. I couldn't shake the image of Lucifer falling, his forms distorting and fading in the darkness. It was as if he had become a part of the darkness itself, something irreversible. But what about us? I asked, my voice faltering. What does this mean for us? My guide looked at me as if he had been waiting for this question. What happened in heaven reflects the battle each of you fights inside yourselves. Lucifer is not the only one making this choice. Everyone has the freedom to decide, every day. I felt a shiver run down my spine. So this doesn't end here? What I had seen wasn't just a story of a distant fight, but something reflected in what happens in each of us. Every choice, every decision we make. The guide nodded slowly, his expression serious. Every choice is a line of light or a line of darkness, Camilla. What you saw was the reflection of what is happening now in all human hearts. Evil spreads slowly. It infiltrates minds, attitudes, words. And that's what you need to understand. The battle is not just in heaven. It happens inside you. I stayed silent, trying to process everything he was saying. The weight of those words seemed to crush my chest. I had never thought of spiritual battle this way. A war not fought with big gestures, but in daily choices, in the small decisions we make all the time. The idea that evil isn't something distant, but something that silently infiltrates, was like a shock. And how can we resist this? I asked, with a growing sense of helplessness. The guide looked at me with a gentleness that seemed to heal some of the pain I felt inside. The answer is within you, Camilla. Humility, gratitude, love. These are the weapons you can use to combat the darkness within you. He paused, and his expression became more intense. Lucifer fell because he forgot what it truly means to love. He traded the search for power for true connection with the Creator. And now, his only mission is to spread the same lie. I was beginning to understand, but at the same time, I still felt an overwhelming weight upon me. The idea that the real fight is against the ego itself, against the pride that arises within each of us, was terrifying. So is that it? I said, my voice trembling. We need to be humble and love, or the darkness will take us. He looked at me with compassion, but his answer was direct. Yes, but it's not just that. It's not enough to be humble and love. You have to choose it every day. The darkness doesn't disappear all at once. It's subtle. It infiltrates the small things, the thoughts, the attitudes, the words. I felt like each of his words was echoing within me, hitting hard in my mind and heart. The idea that somehow even the smallest gestures we make can have such a big impact left me restless. The fight against darkness wasn't something distant or reserved for an uncertain future. It was something present, happening now, in every choice I made. The guide came closer to me, and his eyes shone with a serene intensity. What you choose now is what defines what will come next. Darkness feeds on pride, doubt, fear. Love and humility, however, can weaken this force. I felt like those words had penetrated my being, as if my very view of the world was being redrawn. The weight of choices, the power of each thought, now seemed much greater than I could ever imagine. I had always thought that good and evil were something simple to identify, like a clear battle between right and wrong. But now, things didn't seem so simple. Evil wasn't an external force, but something born from within us. How do we know if we're choosing the right path? I asked, with a pang of doubt. The guide smiled softly, almost as if he had expected me to ask this question. The right choice is not always the easiest one, nor the most obvious. The true choice comes from the heart. When you act with humility and love, Even if the world around you tries to push you towards darkness, you will still be aligned with the light." He paused, and the silence was deep. Pride, fear, anger, revenge, all of these feelings are like open doors to what you saw here. But love, gratitude, and true humility, these are the pillars that keep you strong, even in the chaos. I was still trying to process everything that was being revealed to me. Each word seemed to fit like a piece of a huge puzzle, but the reality of it all still left me stunned. "And what happens to those who fall, those who choose darkness?" I asked, with a heavy heart. The guide looked at me with a serious expression, but also full of compassion. "They are not abandoned. They never were. The opportunity to choose the light remains, but the choice must be true. A choice made with a pure heart, not out of obligation, but out of understanding." Those words haunted me. How could I be so firm in my own choices, knowing that many around me were perhaps struggling with the same doubts? "So, the battle is never really won?" I asked, my gaze losing itself in the vastness around us. The guide sighed, as if he already knew I would ask this question. "The battle has no end. It renews itself every moment. But remember, victory is not just in resisting the darkness, but in choosing the light. And by choosing the light, you also help others to see it." With the weight of everything I had seen and heard, a deep silence filled me. It was as if the world around me had frozen, waiting for something, a decision. I knew I was about to return, but I wasn't sure how it would be, how I would see the world after all of that. "You're going to return now, Camila, but always remember what you've learned here," the guide said, his voice soft yet firm. "What you saw is the true essence of what happens inside each of you, every day." I couldn't say anything else. He approached, placed his hand on my forehead, and suddenly I felt a wave of peace and love enveloping me. It was such a pure sensation that it made me feel like I was being embraced by the very light. It was as if everything I had felt, pain, insecurity, fear, had disappeared in a second. I was somehow at peace. Then everything around me began to fade, and I was pulled back. In the blink of an eye, I was back in the hospital. The sound of the machines, the smell of the environment, the worried faces of my colleagues. I was back, but there was something different. The world seemed clearer, more vibrant. I felt as if the choices I made every day now had immense weight, a greater purpose. When I woke up, my vision was blurry, but something inside me had changed completely. I was back in the hospital with the bright lights and the incessant sound of the machines around me, but it wasn't the same place anymore. It was as if the space around me was just part of something greater. I felt my body, the fatigue, the pain, but the sensation of the experience I had lived was still very much alive within me, almost like a mark. I looked at the faces of my colleagues, still worried and frightened about my condition, but something in me was at peace, as if I had understood something too deep to be described in words. When the medical team stabilized me and I began to regain consciousness, the last thing I heard was the muffled sound of my own heartbeat, pounding strongly, as if reminding me with each beat that my journey, my struggle, my purpose were not over. My heart kept beating, but now I knew why. I had seen something that most people would never see, something that transformed the meaning of good and evil, love and pride, forever. But, like everything that is important, I knew that my return didn't mean just a second chance. It was a calling. What would I choose from that moment on? How would I see the world? How could I impact those around me? Evil no longer hid in the shadows. It was there, in the small choices, in the small words. I could now feel, with a clarity I never imagined, the battle that takes place every second inside us. What I saw beyond wasn't just a vision. It was a truth. And now, back to life, my mission was clearer than ever. To fight against the darkness, not with weapons, but with the love and humility I had seen being so powerful. As I looked at my daughter's face, Who was there beside me, holding my hand tightly? I knew that, somehow, that little light around me, that flame of pure love, was the greatest weapon I could carry. And in that moment, I decided that I would never stop fighting for the light, not just for myself, but for everyone I could reach. As I recovered, the weight of what I had lived in the moments when I was away from reality continued to echo within me. The experience wasn't just a vision or a simple lesson. It was a wake-up call, a profound understanding that every small choice we make has an impact that goes beyond what we can see. I already knew life wasn't simple, but now I understood that we are all part of something much bigger, a cosmic web of choices and consequences intertwined, forming the fabric of existence. I learned that we don't need to make grand gestures to make a difference. The small actions, the moments when we choose to be kind, humble, and generous, are the ones that truly matter. With every smile, every act of kindness, every time we choose love over pride, we are aligning our lives with something greater, with the divine plan. There's no need to do great things to be part of something grand. Each one of us, with our daily choices, is an essential piece in the puzzle of creation. But the greatest lesson I brought back was that in the end, love will always prevail. It will not be by force, it will not be by violence, but by the free choices of those who understand the supreme value of love. What I saw and lived showed me that, in the end, love is the only force that can transform everything around it. It doesn't need to force anything. It grows and spreads through the conscious choice of each one of us. And by doing so, we can weave threads of light, small and powerful, that connect with each other and form a tapestry that illuminates even the darkest corners of existence. Now, when I look at my daughter, at my husband, at everyone around me, I see the power of everyday choices. I know that, with every small act of love and humility, we are shaping something greater, something divine. And even in the darkest moments, I know that love will be the light that always guides us, not by force, but by the beauty of choices made with a pure heart. I'm glad you made it this far. Remember the love of God that is present in our daily struggle. Share this with those you love, and subscribe so you don't miss any videos from our channel.